Hey everyone, welcome back. Tonight, we're stepping into one of the darkest corners of medieval life. Before we get started, do me a favor, hit that like button if you enjoy peeling back the myths and facing history's harsh truths. And if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? This isn't just storytelling, it's time travel, and trust me, you'll want a guide. Now, imagine being born into a world where your future was sealed before you even took your first breath. Not because of destiny, not because of talent, but because of your last name. If your father was a baker, you baked bread. If he was a blacksmith, you hammered iron. But if your father was the town executioner, congratulations. Your life was over before it even started. From the very beginning, executioners were marked people. Entire families carried the stain of death like a hereditary curse. Villagers whispered, priests hesitated to bless them, and even children avoided their kids on the playground. Drop a comment below, be honest. Would you be brave enough to even talk to the executioner's child? And here's the brutal truth. You didn't apply for this job. There was no medieval career fair, no chance to say, I'd rather be a farmer. The role was passed down like an heirloom, but instead of gold or farmland, you inherited blood, fear, and a lifetime of isolation. So dim the lights, take a deep breath, and let's walk together into the shadowy life of the medieval executioner, a life you were born into, but could never escape. From the moment an executioner's child could walk, they were already outsiders. Other kids were taught nursery rhymes and Bible stories. Executioners' kids grew up around gallows and blades. Dinner conversations weren't about crops or weather. They were about how many strikes it takes for a clean cut. Their toys? Wooden axes and miniature scaffolds. Their bedtime stories? Tales of quartering and dismemberment, not knights and princesses. Even priests hesitated to baptize them, believing the curse of blood clung to the family like smoke after a fire. Imagine being 6 years old and walking through the market. The blacksmith's son gets candy from vendors. You get cold stares and muttered prayers. People made the sign of the cross just because you existed. It wasn't just unfair, it was branding for life. Your very name could lock you out of opportunities. Entire families of executioners were denied entry into churches, public baths, and even bakeries. It didn't matter if you had never lifted an axe. The moment villagers saw your face, they remembered what your family represented: death. The most hated, most needed man in town. Executioners lived in a paradox. Towns despised them, but couldn't live without them. Justice in the Middle Ages wasn't quiet. It was loud, messy, and public. Beheadings, hangings, burnings, mutilations, these were all community events. And someone had to make them happen. But no one wanted to be the man with the blade. It was brutal, bloody work that stained your reputation forever. And yet, when criminals were sentenced, everyone looked to the executioner. You were the law's hammer, the crowd's entertainment, the church's necessary evil. But once the execution was done, everyone pretended you didn't exist. Nobles who paid you for your services would never dine with you. Merchants wouldn't sell you bread without flinching. And peasants whispered that you talked to ghosts. You were needed, but never welcomed. Feared, but never respected. A man society depended on but secretly hoped would disappear. Learning the trade. Execution wasn't just swinging an axe. It was a craft, almost like theater mixed with butchery. You had to study anatomy, so you knew where to strike. You had to develop precision, Because missing the neck wasn't just embarrassing, it was humiliating in front of hundreds of villagers. Crowds judged your form like it was a sporting event. One clean swing, applause. 2 swings, groans. 3 or more, booing, laughter, and sometimes even rotten vegetables flying toward your head. A botched execution could ruin your reputation overnight. There was no practice dummy. Apprentices trained on animal carcasses or learned from watching their fathers. Your first real job was on a living, breathing person in front of an impatient crowd. Fail, and you weren't just shamed, you risked being replaced or worse, punished. Because here's the dark truth. While the condemned lost their lives, the executioner risked losing his humanity. Every mistake haunted him. Every swing echoed at night, and no one cared. As far as the town was concerned, you weren't a person. You were a tool. A life outside the walls. As if being hated in public wasn't enough, executioners were literally forced to live outside society. Many towns banned them from living within the city walls. Their homes were built near the gallows, far away from neighbors, where the sound of creaking ropes and crows feasting on corpses was constant background noise. Your front yard, the execution grounds, your neighbors, wild animals, and the occasional gravedigger, your address. Beyond the gate, past the hanging tree. You weren't a villager. You were an outcast stationed like a god dog at the edge of civilization. Inside town, people crossed the street to avoid you. At markets, vendors sometimes refused your coins, calling them blood money. Children were pulled away when you walked by. And if you touched food in a stall, it was often thrown out because no one else would buy it after the executioner's cursed fingers touched it. You weren't just isolated, you were banished, alive but treated like the living dead, the curse of family. If you thought the job ended with you, think again. Being an executioner wasn't a temporary sentence, it was hereditary. Sons inherited the axe. Daughters inherited the stigma. For boys, there was no escape. From the moment you could lift wood, you were training to swing steel. Your childhood wasn't spent dreaming of becoming a knight or a monk. You were practicing aim on logs, sharpening blades, and learning how to stomach the sight of blood. And if you thought marriage might bring relief, think again. Respectable families locked their doors when you passed. Their daughters were forbidden from even speaking to you. Your only marriage prospects were other social outcasts, gravediggers, butchers, lepers, or widows who had nowhere else to turn. If you did marry, your children were cursed from birth. Society didn't see them as kids, they saw them as future killers. Your family couldn't join festivals, couldn't sit in the front pew at church, and couldn't even pretend to be normal. You weren't building a family tree. You were maintaining a family curse. Banned from salvation. As if being hated by people wasn't enough, executioners were also despised by the church. And in medieval Europe, being shunned by the church meant your soul was in danger. Yes, you carried out justice. Yes, you followed the law. But in the eyes of the church, you were still guilty of murder. Many priests refused to hear executioners' confessions. Some churches even banned them from taking communion, as if their souls were permanently stained. You could hang heretics in God's name all week long, but when Sunday came, the priest wouldn't let you through the door. Weddings? Not blessed. Funerals? Not holy. Even burial was uncertain. Many executioners weren't allowed in consecrated ground. Instead, They were dumped in shallow graves outside town walls, the same place where suicides and criminals were left. It was the cruelest irony. You enforced the law. You protected order. But the people who preached forgiveness refused to forgive you, a job measured in shame. Being an executioner wasn't just violent. It was humiliating. Every swing of the axe was judged like a performance. And failure wasn't just embarrassing, it could cost you your life. Imagine the pressure. A criminal kneels before you. Hundreds of eyes are fixed on your hands. You grip the axe. The air is heavy. All you need is one clean stroke. If you succeed, the crowd nods. If you hesitate, if you miss, if the blade sticks in bone instead of severing cleanly, the crowd groans, laughs, or worse, rages. Botched executions were legendary disasters. Too many swings, and you became a joke. Too much hesitation, and rumors spread that you had grown weak. Even nobles lost patience. Some executioners were executed themselves for incompetence. One slip and the executioner became the condemned. Your hands weren't just steady tools of justice. They were your life insurance. One bad day, one nervous shake, and everything ended. The janitor of death. But here's something most people don't realize. The job didn't end when the head rolled. Executioners weren't just axemen. They were the medieval sanitation crew of death. When the crowd went home, when the priests walked away, you were the one left with the body. Sometimes you buried it in unconsecrated ground. Sometimes you burned it. Sometimes you hacked it into pieces and displayed them at the town gates as a warning. And it didn't stop there. Torture before trial. That was your job. Branding criminals? Your job. Flogging? Nailing people into stocks? Cleaning up after noble accidents? Also your job. Executioner wasn't just a title. It was an all-purpose role. You were the butcher, the torturer, the garbage man of human sin. And no matter how many jobs you did, no one ever thanked you. If anything, people hated you more. The curse of blood money. If there was one perk to being an executioner, it was the pay. You earned more than peasants, sometimes even more than craftsmen. Each beheading, each hanging, each torture session came with a tidy bag of silver. But here's the problem. No one wanted your silver. In taverns, bartenders wiped the counter after serving you as if your coins carried disease. Tailors sometimes handed you clothes with tongs, refusing to touch your money directly. And when you donated to the church, priests often used your silver for cleaning supplies, claiming it was tainted. To the townsfolk, every coin in your purse was bought with suffering. No matter how much you earned, you couldn't buy acceptance. At best, you bought silence, an empty table at the tavern, space at the market, or the right to drink alone without being told to leave. Your wealth wasn't freedom. It was another layer of chains. Famous yet forgotten. In a medieval town of just a few hundred people, everyone knew who you were. Children whispered your name, adults muttered it under their breath, and nobles avoided saying it at all. And yet, no one really knew you. To the villagers, you weren't a man with likes, dislikes, or dreams. You weren't a father or a husband. You weren't even fully human. You were a shadow, a tool, a walking reminder of punishment. People knew your face, but not your story. They knew your acts, not your voice. They treated you like a rumor-made flesh. To them, you were less a person and more a myth, a living ghost the town relied on but never accepted. It was the strangest kind of fame, Everyone recognized you, but no one truly saw you. Haunted nights. After the crowd cheered, after the nobles paid, after the priests turned away, you went home. And that's when the real punishment began. You could sharpen your axe 1,000 times, but you couldn't sharpen away the memories. Faces of the condemned haunted you. Some cried, some screamed, some prayed, and the worst ones, the calm ones, the ones who accepted death silently, staring at you as if to say, "You know this is wrong." At night, you saw them in dreams. You heard the thud of the axe, the snap of rope, the gasp of crowds. Everyday sounds became nightmares. A door creaking reminded you of gallows. Firewood splitting reminded you of bones. There were no medieval counselors, no priests to forgive you, no friends to comfort you. You drowned your nightmares in ale or silence, but the ghosts always returned. Because in truth, you weren't just the town's executioner. You were your own executioner too, condemned to relive every death forever. No retirement, no escape. Unlike blacksmiths or farmers, executioners didn't retire. You didn't get to pass the job to someone else when you were tired. You kept working until you shook too much, missed too often, or simply collapsed. When that day came, towns didn't honor you. They replaced you, quietly, sometimes with your son, sometimes with a cousin, sometimes with anyone willing to carry the curse. You faded into obscurity, rotting away in your lonely hut. No feasts, no farewell, just silence. And when you finally died, your burial was often outside the cemetery walls, denied the peace of holy ground. Your life had been necessary but unwanted. And your death was no different. When justice wasn't justice. At first, the job might have felt justified. You executed thieves, murderers, and heretics. Society told you that you were the sword of justice, carrying out divine order. But over time, doubt crept in. Not every condemned man was guilty. Some were desperate fathers who stole bread for their starving children. Some were women accused of witchcraft simply because they prayed in a strange language. Some were rivals of nobles, sentenced not for crimes, but for politics. And you realized something horrible. Your axe wasn't just cutting down criminals. It was cutting down secrets, silencing the inconvenient, and burying the powerless. You wanted to believe in justice. But the more heads you severed, the more you saw how corrupt the system was. You weren't justice's sword. You were its gravedigger. Politics on the block. Executioners weren't just tools of law, they were tools of politics. Nobles used executions to send messages. A public beheading could settle a feud, silence a critic, or erase a rival's claim to land. And you, the executioner, were stuck in the middle. Refuse the order? You'd be branded a traitor. Obey the order? You carried the guilt forever. Some nobles even used executioners for quiet disposals. A body in the woods, a secret hanging, a throat slit in the dead of night. And if the noble ever decided you talked too much, well, you knew better than anyone how easily lives could be ended. In politics, you weren't a servant of justice. You were a weapon one that could be discarded as soon as it became inconvenient. Living with hypocrisy, the hypocrisy was crushing. The same townspeople who demanded brutal justice cheered your work in public, then refused to look at you in private. They celebrated when thieves swung from the gallows, then whispered that you were cursed. They praised your precision in the square, then refused your handshake at the market. You weren't just hated for what you did. You were hated for reminding people what justice actually looked like. They wanted the results, but they wanted to keep their hands clean. You were their convenient scapegoat, the butcher who made the law look powerful while everyone else pretended innocence. It was society's dirtiest trick, using you to do their bidding, then condemning you for doing it. The executioner's legacy, what did you leave behind? Not honor, not glory, not even memory. Executioners weren't written into noble histories. They weren't praised in church records. At best, they were footnotes in trial documents. The sentence was carried out. No name, no credit. Your children inherited your curse. Your grandchildren carried your stigma. And when your line finally ended, no one remembered you existed. The only legacy you left behind was silence. Because in medieval Europe, executioners weren't meant to be remembered. They were meant to be endured. The weight of nightmares. By the end of the day, when the crowds had gone and the gallows stood empty, you went home, but you were never really free. Every condemned man lived again in your dreams. Some cursed you. Some prayed. Some stared silently into your eyes as if to pass their guilt onto you. The worst weren't the screams, but the silences, the resigned faces that accepted death without resistance. Your bed wasn't a place of rest. It was a graveyard of memories. The crack of firewood reminded you of bone splitting. The creak of rope on rafters reminded you of the gallows. Even laughter in the distance stung, because it was always laughter you could never join. You were trained to kill, not to grieve. But grief came anyway, and it stayed. The breaking point. Executioners didn't retire. They broke. Some began to shake, missing their swings. Others drank themselves into oblivion. Some went mad, muttering to themselves, haunted by ghosts no one else could see. And when that happened, the towns didn't mourn. They replaced you, quietly, without thanks. Your name became a joke, your memory a whisper. Remember old what's his name? The one who botched the beheading? Your tools rusted, your hut rotted, and you disappeared from the world as easily as the heads you once severed. Death without dignity. When your time came, your death wasn't glorious. No feast, no farewell, no prayers, just silence. Sometimes your body was found days later, discovered only because of the smell. The church refused you burial in consecrated ground, so you were dumped in a ditch outside the walls, the same earth where suicides and criminals lay. The records kept of your passing were cold, bureaucratic, and cruel. Executioner deceased, replacement pending. No legacy, no mercy, just another name erased, forgotten by design. This was the true curse of being a medieval executioner. It wasn't just the isolation, the fear, or the blood. It was the silence. You were designed to be forgotten. The town wanted you invisible when alive, erased when dead. History never carved your name into monuments. No bard sang songs about you. No portraits were painted of your family. You were the man everyone needed, but no one wanted. You weren't a hero. You weren't even a villain. You were a shadow necessary, hated, and disposable. And in the end, your life mirrored your death, necessary, but never mourned, closing reflection. So, why did it suck to be a medieval executioner? Because you weren't just feared, you were exiled. You weren't just hated, you were essential. You weren't just forgotten, you were erased on purpose. The people needed you, but they also needed to believe you didn't exist. You were the sharp edge of the law, the silent hand of justice, and the living reminder that power always has a price, and that price was your humanity.